Welcome everyone. Title for today's lecture series would be Resting Energy Expenditure. So the first half of the video would mainly deal with the theoretical aspects of the resting energy expenditure, and the later half would will delve more deep into the practical applications and how to calculate the resting energy expenditure. So the energy expenditure is the total energy expenditure of an individual. The biological work which an individual does can be broadly classified into an external work or the internal work. External work is the work which you are performing, which you consider as work as a movement of external objects brought about by the contraction of skeletal muscles. The internal work comprises of all other forms of biological activity which is happening inside the body, which comprises of all the activities which are utilized for the sustenance or compatible with life, like your heart is beating, the respiration, or any other activity of any vital or non-vital tissues which are happening. All the internal work done by the tissues eventually gets transformed into heat. That is very important. According to the first law of thermodynamics, which you all must be aware of, energy can't be created or destroyed. So the total energy which is being produced during the breakdown of organic molecules, high energy compounds which are there, will be converted either into heat or will be utilized for performing work. If there is an extra energy, it can also be stored, and if there is less energy, then the stores can also be utilized for that. So the unit of energy is calories, which is also the unit of heat, because all the metabolic processes within the body ultimately results in heat production. So unit of heat is also utilized as the unit of energy. The amount of heat which is necessary to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water from 14.5 degrees Celsius to 15.5 degrees Celsius is called a gram calorie, or simply a calorie, you can call it with a small c. This is very important. A gram calorie is denoted as a small c, while the principal unit which we utilize in physiology or everyday life is a calorie with a capital C. The calories which you count for your food intake or whenever you are dieting, the calorie which you are counting is capital C calories, which is equal to 1000 calories, 1000 gram calories. So this is the amount of heat. This is the standard unit for energy. So regulation of energy balance, like we discussed, total energy produced can be utilized as heat production or external work. If the total energy produced, if you are consuming more food and producing more energy than you are utilizing in heat production or in the external work which you are doing, like the physical activity, then there would be a positive energy balance. This positive energy balance would be this energy, but if your total energy produced in your body by the food you are consuming is less than the total of the heat production or the external, which can be called as the energy expenditure. So if your total energy which is being produced is less than the energy which is being utilized, then this would be a negative energy balance and your body weight would decrease. This can happen either way, if you are consuming less food, or if you're consuming less food, or if your external work is more. If you are doing more of a physical activity, then this can lead to a negative energy balance and the body weight can decrease. So total daily energy expenditure, we discussed the biological work can be divided broadly into internal work and the external work. The external work we all know is the physical activity. So this is called as the thermic effect of activity, TEA. This is the most variable part of the total daily energy expenditure, which is 15 to 35% also, and this can be controlled voluntarily. While the internal work which is done in the body can be divided into a resting metabolic rate, also the basal metabolic rate. What is the difference between those? We'll discuss in later slides. And the thermic effect of feeding. The thermic effect of feeding constitutes 10% of the total daily energy expenditure, and the resting metabolic rate constitutes of 60 to 75% of the daily energy expenditure. So the total daily energy expenditure per unit time can be called as a metabolic rate and is mainly to the basal metabolic rate or the resting metabolic rate. So first we'll discuss what is the thermic effect of feeding. This is the increase in metabolic rate following a meal. Like you had food, the metabolic rate of the body increases, also called as dietary induced thermogenesis. Simple. The TEF or the thermic effect of feeding consists of two major components. One is the obligatory thermogenesis and second is the facultative thermogenesis. The obligatory thermogenesis was also earlier called as specific dynamic action of the food. This is when you consume food, the ingestion of the food, the digestion, after digestion there's absorption and assimilation of the food. All this requires some energy, so this energy expenditure is called as obligatory thermogenesis because all the energy which is consumed, which would be eventually converted into heat, so it's called obligatory thermogenesis. This would be there. And facultative thermogenesis is the activation of sympathetic nervous system, which has a stimulating influence on the metabolic rate, is also a component of total the thermal effect of feeding. So on what factors the thermic effect of feeding depends? TEF depends on the meal size. If you consume more of a high caloric meal, then the thermic effect of feeding would be more. The macronutrient composition, the time elapsed since previous meal, the nutritional status of an individual or the health status of an individual also determines the TEF or DIT, whatever you want to call it, and also the physical activity before or after the meal. So TEF, if we go into the details of macronutrient composition, the TEF of proteins is much more than the carbohydrates and fats. So if you are taking a high protein meal, then the thermogenesis or the dietary induced thermogenesis would be more than if you are taking a carbohydrate or fatty diet. This is due to the process of deamination of amino acids in the liver, which requires more energy. So energy expenditure is more. That is why proteins have more TEF. So, but we don't consume only proteins. We consume a mixed diet of protein, carbohydrate, and fat. So, a TEF of a mixed meal is about 10 to 12% of the ingested energy, whatever you are consuming. So, if you are consuming a 1,000 calorie meal, so 100 calories would be consumed already in the process of the digestion, absorption, and assimilation of the food. The physical activity augments TEF. That is, if after consuming 1,000 calories of a meal, if you do a physical exercise, then the thermic effect of feeding, which was supposed to be 10%, would be increased to around 20%, which would cause more of an energy expenditure and would cause a negative energy balance if you want that. We discussed about the macronutrient composition, the nutritional status, and physical activity. We'll go into the details of time elapsed since previous meal. So if we see this graph, it has an x-axis showing the time after meal and a y-axis showing metabolic rate in kilocalories per meter square per hour. So around 40 kilocalories per meter square per hour is the basal metabolic rate of the individual after consuming meal, which is the 0 point. After 0.5 hours of consuming meal, the metabolic rate starts increasing. Some authors also suggest that the thermic effect of feeding starts immediately after the consumption of meal. So after consumption of meal, the thermic effect of the metabolic rate starts increasing and would remain high for around 2 hours. Then it would start decreasing, and after 4 to 6 hours or even more in some kinds of meal would come back to the baseline. So this is the effect of food on energy expenditure. Going into the thermic effect of activity. As I already said, thermic effect of activity is the energy expenditure during your physical activity, which is the most variable part and which can be controlled voluntarily. You can increase the thermic effect of activity to cause a negative energy balance. The basal metabolic rate of a physically active individuals are higher than the sedentary individuals. So physical activity not only increases your thermic effect of activity, but the effects of exercise goes beyond the period of exercise itself and also increase the basal metabolic rate, the metabolic rate which is present at the basal condition or the resting conditions of the individual, that also increases, maybe due to the increased sympathetic activity in the physically active individuals. So now we go into the most important and most significant portion of your total daily energy expenditure, which is the basal metabolic rate. The basal metabolic rate is determined when the subject is at a complete physical, mental, and glandular rest. So if an individual is at rest, then where is the energy being utilized? The energy is being consumed for the basal activities, for the vital functions like beating of heart, respiration, maintenance of resting membrane potential of the excitable cells, and urine formation, and all the other activities which are happening in the organs. BMR is the irreducible minimum rate of energy expenditure which is compatible with life. This is the minimum energy which you want to sustain life. But these conditions are very stringent, like a complete glandular or a complete mental rest is not possible at all times. So there's a surrogate marker, you can say, or a substitute of BMR, which is called as RMR. RMR is resting metabolic rate, which was the 60 to 75% of your total daily energy expenditure, which is under less stringent conditions, which are called as resting conditions. So BMR is measured at a basal condition and RMR is measured at a resting condition. So what are these conditions? So basal condition is a complete physical, mental, and glandular rest. So how you ensure that for complete physical rest, you don't have a physical activity for the last 6 hours. Also, the recording would be in a supine position, and for the last 30 minutes, the person should be supine rest, which ensures a complete physical rest. In sitting position, also there is for posture maintenance, there is a requirement of energy. For mental rest, there should be a quiet, relaxed atmosphere, and the individual should be asked not to think too much, which is not possible at all times. And for glandular rest, there is a post-absorptive state with fasting of 14 to 18 hours, which ensures the secretory activity of alimentary canal is minimized. Also, we need a comfortable thermoneutral environment. A thermoneutral environment is an environment in which the person is neither sweating nor shivering. So it's a comfortable environment which is approximately 21 degrees Celsius to 27 degrees Celsius for a lightly clothed individual. But as you can see, these are very strict conditions which are not possible at all times. So we can do the recordings in the measurements in a resting condition. The resting conditions would include a post-absorptive state with a fasting of 12 hours, which is more comfortable than 14 to 18 hours. Quite relaxed atmosphere and comfortable thermoneutral environment is the same. There should not be excess physical activity for the last 2 hours. 30 minutes of rest before the test is still required, and a sitting position can be acquired for during the test. Like in the spirometer, if you are doing the test, you can use a sitting position for RMR, and not for BMR. BMR should be done in a supine position. So, what are the factors which would be affecting the BMR? There would be physiological and pathological factors. The physiological factors include age, sex, body composition, race, sleep, exercise, pregnancy, lactation, stress, and climate. Pathological may fever, thyroid abnormalities, under or overnutrition, obesity, cancer, or anxiety. We'll go into details of each one of them. So, first, dealing with age, metabolic rate declines as the individual ages. BMR, RMR should not be used interchangeably, but we understand the differences. So I will be maybe using them interchangeably in the further slides. So first, dealing with age, the metabolic rate declines as the individual ages. The BMR falls. So the BMR is high during the childhood because of the growth phase, and in elderly the BMR is low partly because there is a decrease in the lean body mass. The lean body mass is the muscular tissue which is more metabolically active than the adipose tissue which is less metabolically active. So overall, if the lean body mass is decreased, then the BMR of an individual might decrease. You can also observe from this graph that so you can also observe from this graph that males have a higher BMR than females for the same age group. Like for an adult of 20 to 40 years, a young adult, the average BMR for a male would be 38 kilocalorie per meter square per hour, but it would be only 35 for a female of the same age group. So why are these differences? Metabolic rate is 10% lower in females than male is mainly due to the differences in body composition, as females have a relatively more percentage of body fat as compared to males. And that's why there is a decrease in BMR. We already discussed that adipose tissue is metabolically less active. So the differences, also these differences might be due to the hormonal profile, as it is observed that increase in metabolic rate in women during post-ovulatory phase due to increase in the levels of progesterone. So it might be due to that also partly, but the main reason is the body composition, which is different, which can also be seen in this upper graph, that if I compare the resting metabolic rate with the fat-free body mass, the fat-free body mass is the lean body mass, then there is no sex differences which can be observed. The light yellow ones are the males and the orange ones are the females. It is a shift, there's a shift, like on the right side there are more males than the left side, but it is linear. When we see the relationship between the fat-free body mass and the resting metabolic rate, it's a linear relationship irrespective of the gender, and the RMR can be calculated from this formula showing a linear relationship. So body composition may adipose tissue ka if there is more percentage, then your BMR would be lowered. This can also be seen in race and ethnicity. Like Asians have a lower BMR than Europeans. Two major reasons. First is body composition, second is the physical activity. Indians have more percentage of body fat as compared to Europeans and American, and also they have a comparatively more sedentary lifestyle. So ICMR suggests that BMR of Indians is 10% and 9% lower for males and females respectively than the international value. So you should subtract 10%, approximately 10% from all the standard equations if you want to find the standards or reference value for the Indian BMR. If you want to compare different groups of individual of different age and genders, we can compare with respect to their body surface area. The concept of metabolic size comes into picture, where it relates the basal metabolism to body mass, and also the surface area law, which states that the heat production, the energy which we are energy expenditure which we are utilizing is eventually going into heat. So the heat production and body size, which is the body surface area, has a fundamental relationship, which is to the power of 0.67, and also the body mass has a relationship with the basal metabolism with the power of 0.75. So if we want to compare a group of individuals, body surface area and fat-free mass provides a good index because of the strong within gender association. We can see from this mouse to elephant curve that if we plot body mass on the x-axis and metabolic rate on x-axis in a logarithmic form, then it is correlated. There's a straight line. It's a linear relationship. As the body mass increases, the metabolic rate also increases. Going away from all the size and shape of the body, we go into more physiological factors like the pregnancy, lactation, and further. So metabolic rate would be obviously more in pregnancy and lactation because of the higher demands. There is slight fall in BMR during the first 18 weeks of pregnancy, but after the 18 weeks, BMR rises steeply due to mainly three reasons. First, the maternal body mass is increasing. Second, there's fetal tissue, which is a highly metabolic tissue, which has been increased. So the basal metabolic rate of the individual, of the pregnant female, would be increased. And also the energy is being utilized to build up fat reserves for lactation. So this extra energy which is required also is required for extra work of heart and respiration during the pregnancy. An extra amount of approximately 350 calories per day is required during pregnancy. During lactation, this still remains high because BMR is now utilized in milk production. As we know, BMR is the basal metabolic rate, which is utilized for the vital functions of the body. If the organs are working more in the basal conditions, then the BMR, the metabolic rate, would also be increased. So the milk production is efficiency of milk production is around 80%. So if a healthy baby requires 850 ml of milk per day and milk has 68 kilocalories per 100 ml, then the pregnant female would require approximately 600 kilocalories per day extra from all the demands which she already has just to meet the demands of lactation. Fat reserves which were built up during pregnancy are also utilized for the lactation, but still 650 kilocalories per day is required extra, and this can be seen as increased BMR during lactation. So pregnancy and lactation both has increased BMR. Athletic training, like we already discussed, effects of exercise goes beyond the actual duration of exercise, and the individuals who are physically more active have more basal metabolic rate. The metabolic rate of the cells are more and they can utilize energy much more than the individuals who have a sedentary lifestyle. Stress can increase the sympathetic nervous system, and like the facultative thermogenesis in TEF, sympathetic nervous system has stimulating effects on the metabolic rate, and the stress would increase their BMR. Right. While during sleep, the BMR decreases by around 10%, which is understandable. Going into the climate, there are two extremes, a cold or a hot environment. Both extremes would cause an increase in BMR. The cold environment there's an increased energy metabolism even during the rest, because shivering generates body heat and to maintain the stable core body temperature, and this requires extra energy. Hot weather also imposes a small additional metabolic load in terms of sweating. Sweating and shivering both would increase the metabolic rate, and thus BMR is comparatively higher in both cold and hot environment as compared to a thermoneutral environment. Thermoneutral environment is what we are trying to achieve in a basal condition, which is a temperature at which there is no sweating or shivering, which is around 21 to 27 degrees Celsius in a lightly clothed individual. Going from all the physiological factors into pathological factors, anxiety has similar effect like stress, it's just more stress, and baseline level of increased sympathetic nervous system. With fever, there's an increase of approximately 13% BMR for each degree rise in body temperature, each degree Celsius rise in body temperature. This is because all the metabolic reactions in the body, which are essentially the chemical reactions in the body, are their rate is increased with increasing temperature. So the BMR would also increase. Thyroid gland abnormalities, a thyroid hormone, more specifically the thyroxine, increases the metabolic activity of almost all tissues of the body. So it stimulates oxidation and heat production within the cell. So thyroid gland is the one which is controlling the BMR. So if the thyroxine levels are increased, the BMR would increase, like in hyperthyroidism or in hypothyroidism or myxedema, the BMR would be low. This is Earlier, the BMR was used as a diagnostic test, a screening test for thyroid gland abnormalities, but now this is obsolete because we have much more better tests. Undernutrition and overnutrition would cause an adaptation in the cells of the body, and thus BMR would change correspondingly. So, during prolonged undernutrition, BMR decreases. This happens in two phases. This does not happen in one go. The initial decline has a different reason than the for later decline. Later decline, you can easily understand that beyond 2 to 3 weeks, there is a decrease due to loss of tissue because of prolonged undernutrition or starvation. The body would lose weight, like we discussed in negative energy balance, and this would eventually cause a decrease in BMR. But initially, there is adaptation, and the metabolic rate of the metabolically active tissue are reduced, which indicates an higher efficiency, like the body is trying to conserve more energy because there is less energy which is being there's a less intake. So this is probably due to less activation of sympathetic nervous system, and also thyroxine levels fluctuate during undernutrition and overnutrition and helps in decreasing or increasing the BMR. Inverse happens in prolonged overnutrition, BMR increases, which is initially the adaptive increase in metabolic activity and later due to increase in cellular mass. Similar. So, overnutrition can cause obesity or decreased physical activity can cause obesity, like in a positive energy balance. So, in obesity, what happens to BMR depends on how we are looking at BMR. If we are looking at the absolute BMR, which is kilocalories per hour, then it's obviously increased because of the increase in body weight. But if we are looking in terms of unit lean masses, the muscular tissue which is present, which is more or less constant in obesity. In obesity, there is more deposition of adipose tissue than the muscular tissue. So the BMR also remains more or less constant. But if we look in terms of body surface area or unit body weight, now the BMR would decrease because there is more deposition of adipose tissue, and adipose tissue is a less metabolically active tissue. Thus, the total, if we consider the total BMR, then BMR with respect to body surface area would decrease because of excess of adipose tissue. It did not increase in terms of unit lean mass because unit lean mass is constant and we are not considering how much adipose tissue is present in the body. That is why BMR remains normal. So this was adipose tissue has lesser and muscular tissue has more. Different organs also have different rates of metabolism, and the percentage of resting metabolism depends on how much they are working. Liver has the most percentage of resting metabolism with 27%. Brain is only 2.5% of the body weight, but still accounts for almost 20% of the resting metabolism which is present in the body. Skeletal muscles are much more in weight, but still resting metabolism is less. But what's interesting is that skeletal muscle can increase their metabolism too many folds during extreme exercises, but brain's metabolism not increase do not increase more than 20-22% even during extreme of exercise. Sorry. So how do we calculate this energy expenditure? Whatever we discussed till now, how do we calculate energy expenditure? The calorie represent the basic unit of heat measurement, the unit of energy, and the term calorimetry defines the measurement of heat transfer. So measuring the energy expenditure, we can measure the heat production and use it as a substitute for the energy expenditure, and the measurement of heat transfer is called as calorimetry. So measurement of energy expenditure can be done by calorimetry, which is direct calorimetry, or indirect. In direct, we are directly measuring the heat dissipated. But indirect measurement में we are measuring the oxygen consumption, and oxygen consumption is used as a substitute and then converted into energy equivalents, which is called as oxygen equivalent, energy equivalent of oxygen. Because of practical difficulties which we already discussed in which is involved in measuring BMR, because the basal conditions are very stringent, we use less stringent resting awake conditions to calculate RMR. So whatever is calculated in laboratories are RMR, more accurately RMR, not BMR, but it's still being used interchangeably in many places. So measurement of energy expenditure, a metabolic process. Whenever you consume any food, any substrate, it is eventually being oxidized and aerobic respiration and oxidized to form carbon dioxide and water, plus generated generation of heat, generation of energy, which would be eventually converted into heat. So this is the metabolic processes which is happening in our body. The calorimetry is the measurement of heat production. Heat production, if directly measured, is called direct calorimetry. But if measured via a substitute like oxygen consumption or a carbon dioxide production, then it can be called as indirect calorimetry, which are like open or closed circuit spirometry methods, which we'll discuss. Direct calorimetry is based on the principle that all the energy expended by the body is eventually converted into heat. This concept was first used practically by Atwater and Rosa in 1890s. They used a well insulated chamber. This is a well insulated chamber in which the subjects would stay for several hours to several days, like 13 or 14 days, and all the heat production which was happening in the body would then be calculated by using these are copper coils in which water would flow. This is an insulated chamber, so all the heat production would cause the water to increase its temperature. So there's a water inlet and there's a thermometer at the water inlet and a water outlet and a thermometer there. So the difference in the temperature would be the increase in would be the increase in the temperature, and then they would calculate how much heat is being generated up till 0.01 degrees Celsius accuracy. They can calculate the temperature which is increased. So to maintain the environment of this closed chamber, the air is going out through an outlet with the help of a blower or a fan. Sulfuric acid is present in these chambers to absorb water, and carbon dioxide absorber is obviously soda lime, which would absorb carbon dioxide. The rest of the air, along with an oxygen supply, would keep on pushing air into the chamber and would maintain the temperature, would maintain the environment of the room. So this was the basis of a direct calorimetry, but the disadvantage is that it's very cumbersome and costly. It would take more time for an individual recording, and the setup is very costly. So they came up with in later 1900s. In 1900s, they came up with a concept of indirect calorimetry. It's based on the principle that oxygen consumption is related to energy production in the body, because eventually everything which is happening is aerobic. The conversion of all the food or substrate would require oxygen for the complete oxidation and would produce water and carbon dioxide. So oxygen is consumed to liberate energy from high energy compounds with the release of carbon dioxide and obviously water. The amount of carbon dioxide which is being produced per unit of oxygen which is being consumed is called as the respiratory quotient, or RQ. This RQ depends on the chemical composition of the substrate, like a protein or a fat or a carbohydrate. All these would have a different RQ, because let's see, is the volume of carbon dioxide produced upon volume of oxygen consumed. Clear up till this? For carbohydrates, we'll take an example of glucose. Glucose is C6H12O6 is the chemical composition of glucose. For complete oxidation of glucose, we require 6 oxygen, and this would produce 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, and energy, which we require, which is the main goal of oxidizing all the high energy compounds. So RQ would be volume of carbon dioxide, which is 6, divided by volume of oxygen consumed, which is also 6. So it would come out to be 1. So the number of carbon dioxide molecules is equal to the number of oxygen molecules which are being utilized. Let's see for fats and proteins if this is true. Taking an example of palmitic acid, we can see that the amount of carbon and hydrogen atoms is much more than oxygen in palmitic acid. So we would require more oxygen to completely oxidize this into carbon dioxide and water, and thus the RQ would be much less than 1. For proteins, we'll take an example of alanine. Similar to fats, we can see that a protein or a alanine molecule has more number of carbon and hydrogen molecules as compared to oxygen. So it would require more oxygen than the production of carbon dioxide, and would be 5 CO2 by 6 would give an average of 0.82 or 0.83. So this is RQ, but what does this mean? How do we use this RQ in calculating an energy expenditure? This concept is called as energy equivalent of oxygen. So studies with bomb calorimetry. Bomb calorimetry is the burning of a substrate and calculating how much energy is being produced. For example, if I'm burning complete oxidation of glucose, how much energy is being produced with respect to how much oxygen is being consumed. This is called as energy equivalent of oxygen. So energy equivalent of oxygen is the amount of energy produced in kilocalories on complete oxidation of a substrate per liter of oxygen consumed, and this depends on the RQ of the substrate. Carbohydrates have 1 RQ, so more energy is being produced per liter of oxygen, which is 5.05, and fats have a lower RQ of 0.7, give lesser energy like 4.69. Proteins have a RQ of 0.82, which is in between carbohydrate and fats, but still the energy equivalent is much less than carbohydrate and fats. This is because proteins are not directly utilized for energy production. Rather, the amino acid molecule is first deaminated in liver, and then the nitrogen and the sulfur fragments which are present in the amino acids are being removed in sweats, urine, feces, etc. The remaining keto acid fragment is oxidized to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So this is how a protein molecule produces energy. So it is less than the carbohydrate and fats. A mixed diet would consist of all of these. So a mixed diet of 0.86 would give you a energy equivalent of 4.86 kilocalories per liter of oxygen. Going a little more into the detail of this RQ concept, a non-protein and a protein RQ. The protein part of a diet would be acting or producing energy differently than the non-protein part, which is the carbohydrate and fats. Carbohydrate and fat ka RQ, if we know, then we can utilize that for energy equivalent. But protein ka energy equivalent is much lesser than the energy equivalent of carbohydrate and fat. So we need to calculate an RQ which is only of carbohydrate and fat and not of protein, because the protein acts differently. Nitrogen, which is excreted in urine, each gram of excreted nitrogen represents a carbon dioxide production of 4.8 liter and an oxygen consumption of 6 liters. This is utilized to calculate the energy which is produced from protein, while the non-protein RQ, which is not consisting of protein, would be utilized for energy expenditure or the calculation of energy from carbohydrate and fats. Let's see this through an example. It would be much more clear now. Oxygen consumed, if oxygen is consumed at 4 liter and carbon dioxide is produced as 3.4 liter and nitrogen excreted 0.13 gram in urine after a meal or after any conditions, if this is given to you, then if I directly calculate RQ, including the protein component, if I ignore this nitrogen excreted, so nitrogen is excreted because protein was there in the diet. If I ignore this and directly calculate RQ is carbon dioxide upon oxygen. So 3.4 divided by 4 gives me an RQ of 0.85. But this is not that accurate. If I want to be much more accurate, then I would calculate non-protein RQ, which is the RQ excluding the proteins. So carbon dioxide from proteins, as we discussed, each gram of excreted nitrogen represents itna carbon dioxide and itna oxygen. So carbon dioxide from proteins would be 0.13 gram of nitrogen would produce 4.8 liter of carbon dioxide, which is 0.62 liters. So carbon dioxide, total carbon dioxide which is produced 3.4 liter, of that only 2.78 liter is produced from non-protein part and 0.68 liter is produced from the protein part. Similar for the oxygen consumed formula is 6 liter. Each gram of nitrogen produces 6 liters. So oxygen from protein part would be 0.78, and if I subtract from total 4 liter, the non-protein oxygen would come out to be 3.22 liters. Dividing CO2 non-protein by O2 non-protein, 2.78 liter by 3.22 liter, I get an RQ, non-protein RQ of 0.86. These are very close values and I don't think it would make a major difference. Let's see if it makes or not. So this is a RQ if I include protein. But if I don't want to include protein because it is a separate metabolism and I want to be more accurate, I would consider nitrogen excreted as 0.13 gram. And by using this equation, कि each gram of excreted nitrogen produces 4.8 liter CO2 and consumes 6 liters of oxygen, I can get how much carbon dioxide and oxygen is being produced or consumed from this nitrogen part, from the protein part, which is 0.62 and 0.78, which is a very less contribution out of the total 4 and 3.4 liters. But still, I can get a non-protein CO2 and oxygen if I subtract from the total, and non-protein RQ would be the ratio of non-protein CO2 produced upon non-protein oxygen consumed, which would come out to be 0.86 to be exact. So now I have to calculate energy expenditure. Energy expenditure is the energy equivalent is in kilocalories, which are these values, but these values are for 1.7 and 0.82, which I don't have. I have a value of 0.86 and 0.85. So there's a table, there's a chart of non-protein RQ comparing with the oxygen equivalent. Oxygen equivalent is the kilocalories per liter of oxygen consumed. So my two values 0.85 and 0.86 of RQ would give me an energy equivalent of 4.862 and 4.875. Let's put them in formulas and calculate the energy expenditure using non-protein RQ. Using the same example, non-protein RQ was 0.86, gives us 4.87 kilocalories per liter of oxygen. So non-protein energy expenditure would be 4.8675 kilocalories per liter of oxygen into the non-protein oxygen consumed. The non-protein oxygen consumed was 3.22, and oxygen consumed from protein was 0.78. Let's put them in formula for protein energy expenditure. Protein energy expenditure is 4.46 kilocalories per liter of oxygen. You don't need RQ for this because this is only proteins. Always proteins would give 4.46 kilocalories per liter of oxygen. That's why RQs including protein is not that accurate. Multiplied by the oxygen consumed by protein part of the diet, protein part of the meal, gives us 3.48 kilocalories. Total resting energy expenditure of 19.18 kilocalories. If I don't consider the protein component, if I just consider that all the carbon dioxide and oxygen which was produced or consumed was because of non-protein part, the non-protein RQ. The non-protein RQ was coming, the not so accurate RQ was coming out to be 0.85, and kilocalories per liter of oxygen, the energy equivalent was 4.862. Multiplying gives me 19.45 kilocalories, which makes a difference of approximately 1.4%, which is not even 2%. Difference is less than 2% with this 10 minutes of elaborate and time consuming method. Also, I required a nitrogen excreted, urinary nitrogen, which I need to calculate. So using all this extra and cumbersome steps, I got maybe 1 or 2% more accurate results, which is not required. So whenever we are doing calculations, we can use a grossly accurate non-protein RQ. Like whatever is the diet, we can use it as a non-protein RQ and calculate the energy with minimal error, because protein component does not cause that much energy metabolism. It's very small. Okay, so this was a little detailed part of RQ. So now we'll compare RQ with RER. What is the difference? RQ is also carbon dioxide produced by oxygen consumed, and RER, the respiratory exchange ratio, is also the carbon dioxide produced to the oxygen consumed. The difference is at which level we are talking about. RQ mein we are assuming the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen, which is measured at lungs, reflects the gas exchange from macronutrient catabolism at cellular level. So RQ wants the exchange of gases at cellular level, but RER gives us the exchange at a pulmonary gas exchange level, which is in stable conditions equal. But in conditions other than steady states, RER would not be equal to the RQ. Let's see how. In states of hyperventilation, when we are in any state of hyperventilation, the carbon dioxide elimination, there would be carbon dioxide washout, which would be disproportionate to the metabolic demands. So RER would be more than 1, because RER is carbon dioxide produced by oxygen consumed. So more of a carbon dioxide is being produced than the oxygen which we consumed at the cellular level. So this would cause an RER of more than 1. Also, during exhaustive activity like an extreme exercise, more of a physical work, RER can go above 1. How? During an anaerobic exercise, there is production of lactate. This lactate which is being produced must be buffered, because we don't want our pH to be increased. So for buffering, we use sodium bicarbonate. The sodium bicarbonate, which buffers lactate, produces carbonic acid. It's a weak acid, and in pulmonary capillaries, this carbonic acid is being degraded into water, carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide is then expired out through the lungs. But this carbon dioxide didn't come from catabolism, didn't come from metabolism, didn't come from the cellular level of macronutrients. So this is a extra non-metabolically produced carbon dioxide, thus changing the RER to above 1 without the RQ being anywhere close to it. These are the two scenarios in which RER can be more than 1. It can also decrease following an exhaustive physical activity at the cellular level, bodily level. Now CO2 is being retained, because this sodium bicarbonate, which was utilized for buffering lactate, should be replenished again. So replenish this, we need carbon dioxide. So now carbon dioxide is utilized for this pathway, and there is a decrease in the expired levels of CO2 without affecting the oxygen consumption. Thus the RER falls below 0.7 without RQ being changed. So these are some conditions in which RQ and RER can be different, but in steady state conditions, both RQ and RER are same. This was the basic principle behind the indirect calorimetry, the oxygen consumption and the carbon dioxide being produced. These are utilized to calculate the energy expenditure by also using the RQ and the oxygen equivalent, energy equivalent. So, but how do you calculate these values? How do you calculate the oxygen consumption, and how do you calculate the carbon dioxide produced? So this can be calculated or measured, is better word, through a closed circuit spirometry, open circuit spirometry, or a doubly labeled method. We'll see what are all these methods. First, the doubly labeled method. In this, there are two isotopes. One is of hydrogen, which is deuterium, and all second is oxygen, which is oxygen 18. Thus, it's called the doubly labeled water method. This labeled water is injected into the body. The individual is loaded with this labeled water. The individual is loaded with this doubly labeled water, and these isotopes distribute throughout the bodily fluids like water. So after this, the elimination rates of hydrogen and oxygen isotopes are being monitored. Where would they eliminate? The hydrogen isotope would be eliminated as water in sweat, urine, and pulmonary water vapors, but oxygen would be eliminated in both hydrogen and also carbon dioxide. So this, if I subtract the elimination of oxygen from hydrogen, then water would be cancelled out, but the carbon dioxide produced would be left. So difference between the elimination rates would give me the carbon production. The carbon dioxide production which I got, we'll estimate the RQ values of the individual by their diet, the composition of their diet, and RQ is volume of carbon dioxide produced by the oxygen consumed. I can calculate the oxygen consumed indirectly from this method, this doubly labeled method. So the advantages of this doubly labeled method are it's precise, it's stable method, it's used as a gold standard to compare the or calibrate the values from other methods. It can be used to measure energy expenditure for a long period of time. Direct calorimetry could also be done for a long period of time, but for that, individual has to stay in that chamber. Also, other methods of indirect calorimetry like spirometer, the individual has to stay close to a spirometer, which is a very bulky instrument. So, the activity levels are very restricted. But in doubly label method, the energy expenditure can be measured for several weeks in unstrained individuals. Disadvantages, obviously, it is very expensive. The enriched oxygen is expensive, and also to determine the ratio of isotopes after the depletion using mass spectrometry is also an expensive technique. Going into the second technique second method to of indirect calorimetry, the open circuit spirometers. The open circuit spirometer and closed circuit spirometer, the major difference is the inspiration. What are the individuals inspiring? In open circuit, the individual is inhaling the atmospheric air, the ambient air, with a constant composition of approximately 21% oxygen and 79% nitrogen, with a negligible 0.03% of carbon dioxide. But in a closed circuit spirometer, the individual is inhaling 100% oxygen, which is present, which is loaded into the spirometer. So this is the major difference in this. Further, the in this open circuit spirometer, the changes in oxygen and carbon dioxide percentage in the expired air is compared to the inspired air. And then subtracting the inspired and expired air, we would get the carbon dioxide production or the oxygen consumption, and whichever is the process of on energy metabolism which is happening. So what all things are being analyzed or calculated using this open circuit spirometer? The volume of inspired and expired air both are being calculated, and also the percentage, the composition of gases in the inspired and expired air, the percentage of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and also the percentage of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the expired air. There's a computer interface which performs all these calculations based on the electronic signal which are being received, and gives a printed or a graphical display of data which is there. So the advantage is everything is being done by the computer, so you don't need to do much. There's easy to do, and the speed of data analysis is very high because of the computer interface. The disadvantage is the high cost of this equipment and frequent calibration. So this is the computerized open circuit spirometry data, which is being displayed either on the screen or can be printed. So there are CO2 and oxygen analyzers which is being present, and they calculate the carbon dioxide and oxygen percentage in both the inspired and expired air. So to calculate the oxygen consumption using an open spirometer and using all the parameters which it's giving you, like volume of inspired air, volume of expired air, and all the percentages. Let's focus on oxygen first. So for oxygen consumption, we need to subtract whatever oxygen is being inhaled and whatever oxygen is being exhaled. This would give us the oxygen consumption. So volume of inspiration, this is the total volume of inspiration. We can multiply this by the percentage of oxygen and get the volume of inspired air, the volume of oxygen in the inspired air, and total volume of expired air into the percentage of oxygen that expired air would give you the volume of oxygen in the expired air. When I subtract these, I get a volume of oxygen consumption. In this, if I assume that volume of inspired and expired air is equal, and also I can put a percentage of inspired air as 21% approximately, so I can get a simplified equation like volume of oxygen consumption is equal to volume of expired air, because some spirometers don't give you the volume of inspired air, they only give you the volume of expired air. So a simplified equation would be volume of oxygen consumption is equal to volume of expired air 21% minus whatever is the percentage in the expired air. So this would give you the volume of oxygen consumption. Similarly, you can derive the equation for volume of carbon dioxide production, which would be volume of expired, total volume of expired air into percentage of carbon dioxide in the expired air minus 0.03%, which would be the percentage of carbon dioxide in the inspired air. There's a simpler method to do this. The simpler method is a Weir method. Weir method was designed by John Weir in 1949. It's a simple method to calculate the caloric expenditure within plus minus 1% of the traditional RQ method, which we discussed. So the equation is volume of expired air at standard conditions, at STPD conditions. We'll discuss what is STPD and ATPS conditions later. This is standard temperature pressure at dry into 1.044 minus 0.0499 into percentage of oxygen in the expired air. So you need only two things: the volume of expired air, total volume, and the percentage of oxygen. This whole thing, which is present in the bracket, which is written in the brackets, is called the Weir factor. And this Weir factor you can calculate using this equation, or more simply you can find out from this Weir factor table. So for this, like there's an example which is given here. A person runs on a treadmill and the volume of expired air, total volume of expired air at STBD conditions is 50 liters per minute, and percentage of oxygen in the expired air is 16%. So you only need to analyze the expired air to get this. Compute the energy expenditure by the Weir method or any other method you can use, but this is a simple method. In this, the kilocalories would be volume, which is the 50 liters per minute, into the Weir factor. So either I can calculate the Weir factor from this formula, or I can just find out where is 16% is equal to 0.2456 of the Weir factor. So I just multiply this 0.2456 with the volume of expired air and get 12.3 kilocalories per minute of energy expenditure. Very simple. Open circuit spirometry, we discussed all this was a computerized method. Similar concept, the calculation, the volume of expired or the percentage of expired air can also be utilized in different forms, like a Douglas bag method or a portable spirometer. Because a spirometer is a bulky instrument and the person should be restricted in the lab with the instrument to calculate their energy expenditure, and mostly only resting energy expenditure can be calculated. But if you want to calculate energy expenditure during exercise or during any activity, then those can't be used. You can use a doubly labeled method, but portable spirometer can also be used like this. The concept is same. The volume of inspired and expired air is being analyzed, and also the percentage of gas, which is oxygen and carbon dioxide. In this Douglas-Beck method, the person is inhaling the ambient air of 21% oxygen and 0.03% carbon dioxide through a one-way inspiratory valve, and exhaling into this large, which is a canvas or a plastic Douglas bag, and all the expired air is being collected into this Douglas bag, and after collection, sample a small part. The total volume would be calculated from the Douglas bag, but a small part would be then passed through a gas analyzer, and the percentage of carbon dioxide and oxygen would be calculated. All the equations which we used earlier can be utilized for these methods also, but the Douglas bag method is just more cumbersome to perform. Going into the last method, which is the closed circuit spirometry method, which is a Benedict Roth spirometer. This is a closed circuit, so the inhalation is not of ambient air, it's of 100% oxygen. So the spirometer is filled with 6 liters of 100% oxygen, and oxygen is obtained in a metal drum which floats on a water seal. So if you guys don't know how a spirometer looks, this is a schematic diagram of Benedict Roth spirometer. This is a pulley. This pulley is connected to the spirometer bell. The spirometer bell hangs between an inner cylinder and an outer cylinder. The outer and inner cylinder, the part between the outer and inner cylinder, is filled with water, and the inner cylinder has a canister with soda lime to absorb all the carbon dioxide which is passing through it. The pulley is connected to a writing pen which is connected with a kymograph. The kymograph drum is revolving and this is being recorded. So when the spirometer bell, we are filling inner cylinder, we are filling the inner cylinder with 100% oxygen. This would cause the bell to float on the water, and as soon as the oxygen is being consumed, the oxygen being consumed would cause lesser volume because it's a closed circuit. We are not opening this to atmospheric air. So as soon as the oxygen is being consumed, this spirometer bell would go down, and this would cause the pulley to cause the lever to go up. So the oxygen consumption can be calculated from the slope of the graph which is being recorded, which we'll see in the further slides. But this is the basic spirometer which is present in all the physiology labs. So a person breathes in 100% oxygen through an inspiratory valve and breathes out into the drum through an expiratory valve. So the breathing out would go into the soda lime canister. The soda lime, what it does, it absorbs all the carbon dioxide which is being produced. So now the carbon dioxide which is exhaled is being absorbed, but the oxygen which is consumed is not being replenished again. It's not being filled again. So this is how the volume of that closed circuit would keep on decreasing. Otherwise, the carbon dioxide which is being produced would obviously cause the drum to remain at the same position as it was before, because we are assuming that volume of inspired and expired air is equal. So the oxygen which is being used up is which is being consumed, and also the carbon dioxide which is being produced is absorbed by the soda lime canister. Both of them together would eventually cause a volume depletion which would cause the drum to move down, and in the kymograph it would be seen as the graph is going up because of the pulley. So rate of oxygen consumption can be calculated. It's a very simple and a pretty accurate method, but disadvantage is that it's a bulky instrument and the person has to stay close to this instrument, and only resting or light exercise conditions can be calculated. Like a bicycle ergometer can be placed close to the spirometer, and light exercise can be energy expenditure during light exercise can be calculated, but is mostly used for resting conditions. And also the closed circuit spirometer, there's a resistance to accommodate large breathing volumes. So this is the mouthpiece from which the person is breathing in and out. So this is a spirometer, same, just not a schematic diagram. This is the pulley, this is the bell which is present, and this is the outer cylinder. Inner cylinder we can see if we remove the bell from above, and this is the kymograph on which a writing lever would make the graph, and this is the mouthpiece and all the tubings which are there. This is a gas inlet from which we can fill this pyrometer with 100% oxygen. This display would be used to change the speed of the kymograph. This is a star on and off. So if I remove the bell and observe the observe the spirometer from above, this is the outer cylinder which is present, and this is the inner cylinder. Between the outer and the inner cylinder there is water, and the bell also goes into that water to make a water seal. And in the inner cylinder there is this soda lime chamber. All the expired air goes first through the soda lime chamber, then into the inner cylinder, into the bell, and the soda lime canister is to absorb the carbon dioxide which is present. So the procedure is, the subject should be in a basal state, which we already discussed is very difficult. So we can get it in a resting state and call the metabolic rate as resting metabolic rate or RMR. So first precaution is that the subject should be in a resting or a basal state. After that, we allow the subject to get accustomed to breathing through a mouthpiece of the spirometer and in room air, not 100% oxygen, because we are not used to breathing through a spirometer with an increased dead space due to the tubings and also through mouthpiece, the mouth breathing. That's why we allow the subject to get accustomed. Also, only breathing through the mouthpiece is required, so we also use a nose clip. to prevent nose breathing. Then oxygen consumption is recorded on the spirometer till a steady state is obtained. We take out the graph and we calculate the oxygen consumption through the slope of the through the slope of the graph, and then from that oxygen consumption we can calculate the metabolic rate. So this is a typical spirometry record which you will get. We obviously need to record the details of the subject, their name, the age and the sex, which will be required to get the reference values, the height and weight which we'll require for the body surface area, and also the conditions in which the test was being performed, the ambient temperature and the barometric pressure. We'll get to know the importance of this in conversion from ATPS to STPD. So this is a typical spirometry record. In this record, the slope, as you can see, is going up. So this is because the bell is going down due to oxygen consumption, and because of the pulley, the writing lever goes up, and these are the tidal volumes, and steady state of 6 minutes is required. The slope of steady state of 6 minutes. So the speed of the spirometer which we are recording is at very low speed of 0.4 millimeter per second. So 0.4 millimeter per second into 61 minute के लिए into 6 would give us 144 millimeters for 6 minutes. So the distance can be utilized as, or you can also use a time marker to calculate exactly 6 minutes of oxygen consumption. Now for this 6 minutes we draw two lines on the upper part of the graph and the lower part of the graph, intersecting most of the points. Half of the peaks the peaks which are going above the line and the peaks which are going below the line should be equal, so that we get an accurate average of the peaks. From these two lines, I get the middle line. This would be the slope of the graph. This slope is the oxygen consumption. So I need the average oxygen consumption from this slope. The average oxygen consumption can be calculated by extrapolating it to the y-axis, which comes out to be 1250 ml. So this is the only value which we need from all this graph and all this setup, which is 1250 ml of volume of oxygen consumption in 6 minutes at ambient conditions. This is the whole thing. Now these are the ambient conditions called as ATPS. ATPS is ambient temperature, pressure, saturated air with humidity, with water vapors. According to Charles' law, volume is proportional to temperature. Boyle's law, volume is inversely proportional to temperature. So if the temperature and pressure conditions change, if the temperature is increased, the gas expands, and if the pressure is increased, the gas contracts. So if I calculate the volume of oxygen consumption in different laboratory settings, then I would get different values for the BMR, for the volume of oxygen consumption at the resting state. I need to convert this volume from ATPS to STPD. STPD is standard condition, the standard temperature, pressure in dry air. Because firstly, to compare between different labs. Second, the conversion of oxygen consumption to energy is the oxygen equivalent, the energy equivalent, which is kilocalories per liter of oxygen consumed. That is standardized. The using bomb calorimetry, they burn meaning completely oxidize a substrate like carbohydrate, glucose, which we discussed, completely oxidize to energy, and they calculate the heat production or the energy which is being produced per liter of oxygen. All this standardization is being done at a fixed temperature and pressure. So I need to convert this ATPS to STPD for all these reasons. STPD is the standard temperature pressure of dry air. So standard temperature is 273 Kelvin. The standard pressure is 760 millimeter of Hg, and the water vapor pressure is 0, that is the dry air. To convert ATPS to STPD, I would use the ideal gas equation, which is PV is equal to nRT. If I remove the constants N and R, then it would come out to be P1 V1 by T1 is equal to P2 V2 by T2. So in this one side can be taken as SGPD and the second other side can be taken as ATPS. So if I take P1, V1, T1 as SGPD, then the standard pressure would be 760 and the standard temperature would be 273. And ATPS volume and the volume V1, the volume at SGPD I need to calculate. Here the volume at ATPS is what we got from the spirometer. The pressure here in ATPS would be the barometric pressure of the lab minus the water vapor pressure because I need a dry air. So water vapor pressure and the temperature would be the ambient temperature but in Kelvin. So we had a recording of 20 degrees Celsius. So in Kelvin it would come out to be 293 Kelvin. And the pressure, the barometric pressure in the lab minus the water vapor pressure. So I need the water vapor pressure, which we can get from these charts, which are ATPS to SGPD conversion charts. The ambient temperature was 20 degrees Celsius. So it gives me a 17.5 millimeter of Hg of water vapor pressure, aqueous vapor pressure. We can also use this chart directly to calculate ATPS to SGPD conversion by using these factors, but it's not recommended. Going into the calculations, we got one value from the spirometry record, which was volume of oxygen consumed in 6 minutes at ATPS, which was equal to 1250 ml. Now this was in 6 minutes, so we can either convert it to minutes, per minutes or per hours. We can go into per hour by multiplying by 10, which would be 12.5 liters per hour at ATPS. Converting it into SGPD would require P1 V1 by T1 is equal to P2 V2 by T2. Here the pressure is the barometric pressure standard, which was 760. The temperature is the standard temperature of 273 and the volume is the volume at SGPD which we require. Going here, the pressure is the barometric pressure minus the water vapor pressure, which is 718 was the barometric pressure, and 17.5 we calculated at the ambient temperature, which was 20 degree by 17.5 mmHg. The volume at ATPS we calculated as 12.5 liters per hour and the ambient temperature in kelvins is 293. Calculating all this would give us 10.74 liters per hour of volume of oxygen consumption at STPD. From this volume of oxygen consumption, now we want to go into the energy. We require the energy equivalent, the oxygen equivalent, which would be based on the diet of the individual. The RQ of a mixed diet, which we assume the patient is on a mixed diet, is RQ of 0.86. Therefore, oxygen equivalent would be 4.86 kilocalories per liter and the resting metabolic rate would come out to be 10.74 liters per hour of oxygen consumed into the energy equivalent. The energy equivalent is 4.86, which is 52.2 kilocalories per hour. Liters got cut to 52 kilocalories per hour. We can either compare this value with the reference or standards, or we can go into per meter square standards. We can divide this RMR of 52.2 with the body surface area and get the RMR in kilocalories per meter square per hour and then compare. So to calculate the body surface area, we can use either the Du Bois formula or we can use the nomogram chart. So the formula is body surface area is 71.84 into the body weight in kilogram raised to the power 0.425 into height in centimeters raised to the power 0.725. So this is a very complicated formula, so we can use the nomogram chart. So nomogram chart mein there are three scales, 1, 2 and 3. The first and third scale are the first and second scale are the height and the weight. The third scale gives us the surface area. So to find this, what you need to do is you need to make 2 points on the height. If the height of the subject is 5 feet 4 inches and the weight of the subject was 68 kgs. So we make 2 points on the two scales, height and weight, and then we join these two scales with a straight line, and where it intersects on the body surface area scale is the body surface area of the individual. Simple. So 1.76 meter square is the body surface area. We calculate the RMR is 52.2 kilocalories per hour. would give us the RMR as 29.66 kilocalories per meter square per hour. We got to the result. But what is the inference of this result? Is it normal? Is it not normal? Is it increased or decreased? For this, we need a normal range. So there's no normal range because we discussed all the factors which affect the RMR, the age, the sex, the body composition. So because of this huge variability, there's no normal range of RMR. We have predictive equations or standard charts, and we compare the individual using their age and sex reference. So we calculate a percentage deviation from their expected value, and the expected reference value can be calculated from either these kind of charts or can be calculated from a predictive equations. And a normal RMR range would be plus minus 10% of that reference for their age and sex. But we already discussed that there is a difference of RMR between different race, ethnicity. So the international standards which are being made cannot be directly applied to the Indian standards, and there are no much Indian standards. According to ICMR and IN 2020 guidelines, the BMR of Indians is 10% lower than the international standard values. So whatever we get from these reference values, we subtract 10%. That would be the expected BMR of an Indian person, and then we calculate the percentage deviation from that expected value. And then if it lies within the 10 plus minus 10%, it would be a normal BMR, or otherwise we can get a increase or decrease BMR. So from this standard basal metabolic rates, we can calculate like the expected RMR for a 28-year-old female we want. So we get the lower value, which is the 25 years, not 30. We can also use these charts, which have a much more range than the smaller chart, or we can also use a predictive equation. So this would give me the expected RMR or BMR as 35.9 kilocalories with a capital K, so kilocalories per meter square per hour. So this is my expected value according to international standard. For Indians, expected RMR would be 10 or 9% less than the international standards for males and females respectively. So subtracting 9% from this gives us 32.67 kilocalories per meter square per hour. The percentage deviation is observed minus expected upon expected into 100. Observed values were 29.66 kilocalories per meter square per hour. And the expected values for the Indian standards after subtracting from the Western standards gives us 32.67, gives us a percentage deviation of minus 9.21%, which is within the normal limits because normal limits are plus minus 10%. So these are charts. We can also use some predictive equations which were recommended in ICMR. ICMR recommended the FAO, WHO, UNU. They had a joint committee which they proposed predictive equations for males and females of different age groups. You can put the body weight in this and calculate the expected RMR, and after this subtract 10% or 9% for males and females respectively and get an expected value. This would give you a BMR in kilocalories per day, not kilocalories per meter square per hour. So this would give you kilocalories per day. You can compare the values which we get directly without dividing by body surface area. Also, there are some other international standard equations which you can use, but remember to subtract 10% from the international standard values for the Indian standards. That's all for today. It was a pretty long video, but for RMR, for resting energy expenditure, but we covered, I think, almost everything from the theory to the practical aspects. If you still have any doubts, then you can comment your doubts under this video or reach out through these channels, and we would be happy to clear your doubts. Thank you.